Yeah, it's going to be really wet.
Just the sort of conditions you enjoy, Eoghan?
Perfect conditions for a day's pheasant shooting. They breed them tough in Scotland. Just a mild shower.
Oh yeah, this is Scottish shooting for you.
So we're at over a Screevy shoot, which is just on the boundary of the Angus Glens. It's run by father and two sons, the Hopkinson family. They'll shoot 3 to 4 days a season here. Bags rarely exceed the sort of 120 mark. Early season, there are the odd red leg partridge kicking around. It is mainly a pheasant shoot. You do see a lot of resident woodcock here as well, and yeah, it's a pretty challenging shoot. Even in good weather, they're decent birds. The group of guns we have here today, I've known most of them for at least 15 years. They're all good friends, all very decent sportsmen, and hopefully we can get out of here without using a boat today. I'm actually trialling some eco-friendly cartridges in steel, 32 gram 5. I found them to be as lethal at range as the 30 gram 5s in lead that I use for most other things. I mean, we really need to start looking at these because they are viable alternatives, and I know they're effective. As people will have noticed, we have been trying to bust a few myths in the magazine. We've had articles from our counterparts in Europe and further afield in the US who've been using non-lead ammunition for years, and it's really just about demonstrating to people there's actually nothing to fear in terms of lead ammunition. Sure, we may have to make some changes, but I view it very much in a similar vein to 4-star leaded petrol. Before that was banned, I'm sure a lot of people thought it would be extremely troublesome and it would make their lives a misery, but here we are, we're using unleaded fuel. And the more demand there is, actually, the better that ammunition will get, and the more the price will come down.
Pheasant or partridge?
Partridge, actually. I like to braise them whole with a bit of Savoy cabbage and cream and juniper berries. But I do love pheasants. I mean, I probably eat pheasant 3 or 4 times a week. I try and make that supply last as long as I can. We don't buy any supermarket chicken. Why would we, when we've got access to all that game?
I think a huge freezer.
We've got 2 freezers. Yeah. You know, pheasant is so versatile. I think there's this misconception about pheasant being really gamey or dry. I think if you're sympathetic to it and don't try and cook it like waterlogged supermarket chicken, it's fantastic.
I had a little squint at the clicker.
How many shots?
A lot.
Probably don't see a lot of these guys outside the season. I think that's one of the great things about shooting, is that it does bring old friends together who perhaps wouldn't see each other otherwise. But another aspect, of course, is actually meeting new people, which is important in the countryside. You know, shooting is extremely important to community cohesion out here, to mental health, which is often overlooked actually. When we talk about sustainability, we often forget the human element, and for me that's really important and often overlooked.
The chairmanship, is it a fulfilling role?
I think it's very fulfilling. It has its challenges, definitely, and it can be very daunting, but I must say that if you are passionate about shooting, this is a dream role to have. It really allows you to, with your fellow board members, to leave your stamp on the sport that you love, but also to try and make a lasting contribution to preserving this way of life that we love, really. And I can see no better way of doing that than not only chairmanship, but being on BASC Council.
Do you see it as maybe a slightly different era from maybe past chairs? You know, you're dealing with a very different type of situation. Although you want to remain positive about the sport, you're also sort of having to sort of man the battlements a bit as well.
I think it is a different era. I mean, we're facing, I mean, shooting has faced challenges for the past 100 years, for sure, but I don't think we've faced quite as many at the same time. So we're seeing a lot of challenges come in at the same time. That said, we are in a good position to prioritise. We've got a an extremely competent set of staff, a great strategy, and I genuinely think we're very well equipped to take the sport forward. And I think to a certain extent the crisis has actually helped to bring us together. I mean, actually it has. There's no two ways about it. Whereas in the past, perhaps when things weren't so challenging, I think there definitely was a battle for membership going on. That's not to say it won't happen again, but we're now closer to our contemporaries than we ever have been. We all realise that the challenges that face us can only be faced if we act as a unit. And we'll see more of that as time goes on. Still heavy rain, but it feels like drizzle compared to earlier.
So Eoghan, when it comes to sort of 2020, what's the sort of like forefront of your brain? What are you thinking about trying to deal with and part of your agenda?
Well, I think there are probably 4 pillars to this. The first is that I'd like people to put something back into their sport in 2020. Whether you do something for Year of the Gamekeeper 2020, take part in a conservation project, encourage your friends to join BASC or even one of the other organisations, or introduce someone to game or cook it for them. That's kind of the first aspect. The second bit is I'd like to see more of us actually making an effort to eat game. Thirdly, I'd like to say something about standards. I think there are a lot of people who've come to the sport late, and that's great, and that's to be encouraged. But those people, those men and women, ought not to be afraid to ask those with more experience for advice. I think the risk there is that we end up sort of circumventing the high standards that we're used to in this sport, and that we absolutely need if we're going to continue. And I suppose lastly, I'd like to say a word on sustainable ammunition. We are conservationists. Shooting is synonymous with conservation. We need to start thinking hard about using sustainable ammunition. Lead is a toxin. It has known effects on wildlife if consumed. And quite frankly, there are alternatives available. We may need to make some changes, but in the grand scheme of things, they're relatively minor. And if we want to continue shooting, and if we want to be self-regulating and not have regulation imposed on us, then we need to make an effort to change.
An issue that has reared its head, no pun intended, this year is trophy hunting.
Sure.
Where do you think BASC are going with that? What's the stand within the organisation?
In a UK context, you take away the ability for an estate to make money from the sale of a stag, a roebuck, whatever. You're going to further marginalise already struggling rural societies. There's also this piece around what is a trophy. I shoot a roebuck. I'll use every piece of it that I can, and I want to have something to remember that particular stalk by. So rather than chucking the antlers in the bin, I'll put them on the wall. A photograph of a day like today, that could be considered a trophy. There's nothing macabre or sinister about it. It is about the enjoyment of a good day, those special memories. And personally, I think there is no place for people in this country to be telling African nations how they should and shouldn't be managing their wildlife. It's worked pretty well so far, so what is the problem?
Where these sort of attacks are coming from is driven grouse. I think Packham himself said that walked up grouse, he didn't have an issue with driven grouse.
Personally, I don't hold any truck with the argument of, I have nothing against driven grouse shooting, but walked up grouse shooting is fine. If you take away driven grouse shooting, you're not going to have walked up grouse shooting. Walked up grouse shooting is only economically viable because it's supported by driven grouse shooting. I think from the shooter's perspective, one dead grouse, one dead pheasant is too many. So we need to hold firm. There is nothing to be ashamed of when it comes to driven grouse shooting. What could be seen as a potential downside is greed. You know, how many birds shot is the right number? And I think that's where the shooting community needs to take a long, hard look at itself. If it becomes solely about pulling the trigger, and I've nothing against people enjoying their sport, I'm enjoying some driven pheasant shooting here today, but it's not just about pulling the trigger. This is about harvesting a sustainable food that's delicious, healthy, and that we can all enjoy. So there are two drives merged into one here. As you can see, it's quite a long, thin strip of wood, but there's heather hill behind it. So what the beaters are going to do is they're going to bring in the heather hill and that wood and push through the wood that way. The guns down there will stay where they are. This end of the line of guns will just steadily shuffle down as the beaters push through, and we'll get some really nice birds coming off the top.
It's a dynamic drive.
It's a very dynamic drive, and you have to have your wits about you.
So I feel we're doing an issue a drive here, Eoghan.
Yes.
Raptor persecution is something you said you wanted to talk about.
One issue that keeps rearing its ugly head is raptor persecution, and it really irritates me, quite frankly. They are doing the rest of us a severe disservice. They're prioritising themselves above all others, and they're sabotaging shooting. And I think it's about time that we looked at those that do persecute raptors through the same lens as sabs. They're no better, and quite frankly they're handing ammunition to those that would see us stop shooting. So if you know of raptor persecution, if you're doing it, it needs to stop. It needs to stop now, otherwise the sport of shooting will suffer, and you will continue to give ammunition to those who want to put a stop to this. And that has very far-reaching consequences, not just for those of us that enjoy shooting, but for those who depend on shooting for their livelihoods.
Considering the conditions, James, you and your beaters have done a great job.
Fantastic job. It's Eoghan, I don't know whether I should say this on camera, but Eoghan successful in that shot or not.
Just go, well done, Eoghan.
Well done, Eoghan.
There we go.
Great shot.
There we go.
So no, it's a hard day here. A lot of walking, so they deserve a good dram at the end of the day.
There's some beautiful topography. This part of the world is gorgeous.
It's absolutely fantastic. Oh, there's another one away.
Is that Eoghan's as well? Are we claiming all of these?
No. But I would have to say Eoghan did shoot a very fine bird there. It just goes to show what steel shot can certainly do the job.
So what are you
Eoghan's
doing on
proving
your
that.
shoot? Are you advocating that as well? What's your stance?
Eoghan has been suggesting that we ought to think about having a go with steel. If Eoghan wants to donate some boxes to me for the end of the season, so I can
Hold on a second.
have a go. Yeah.
So it's been a great day. That's us finished now. We'll go back to the yard and we'll lay out the bag and we'll see what we have. The guns will probably take a good portion of the game away. I know I will be, and the rest will be picked up by the game dealer in a couple of days' time to enter the food chain. That is my sort of idea of what a good shoot looks like. We've not shot to excess. Where there is management for shooting, you see an abundance of wildlife and habitat. You know, if you left these places to fend for themselves, the countryside would be a lot poorer off for it. So it's a really positive story we have to tell with game shooting.